Hello, friends. Hello, everyone. Please feel free to keep getting food and drink and all the things you need to be comfortable. But we are going to get started with our program so we can stay on time. Maybe let's just take a second. I don't know about you, but I had a very busy day today. Just take a second and arrive here in this room. It's so fun for me to be here with all of you all. I look out and I see 130 friends. And so just take a second, arrive here in this room. We are here tonight to celebrate a serious milestone. So as I think and hope everyone is by now aware, yesterday on Earth Day, President Beilock announced the Dartmouth Climate Collaborative, which is a new effort to connect Dartmouth's existing strengths in climate. It also is a $500 million investment in real climate action at Dartmouth to decarbonize our campus, which is the biggest infrastructural investment we've ever made, and certainly the biggest on sustainability, and to me that feels really real and really exciting. And it will enable the first phase of our campus decarbonization plan, the first 5 years. So we wanted to host this dinner, first of all, out of gratitude. This journey, I've been at Dartmouth for 13 years. This journey to this moment has been a group effort. Literally everyone I see has played a part. Generations of students who have demanded that Dartmouth step up to the climate challenge. Generations of faculty who've spent years or decades or multiple decades advocating that Dartmouth act on climate. Community members who have held Dartmouth accountable to do more in the Upper Valley and to support our place. Staff members who've been working diligently to improve our sustainability in ways large and small. So this achievement is an achievement of all of us. I'm delighted this is our first sort of big sustainability Earth Week dinner since COVID, and I'm so glad that it gets to be this year that we get to come together in community once again. That feels very important. So maybe just a huge round of applause for everyone in this room who's worked to make this moment happen at Dartmouth. Tonight, we're honored to be joined by several members of the Dartmouth community who are going to share updates and excitement and their personal experience with climate action in their own lives. Professor Laura Ogden will introduce the Climate Futures Initiative, and we will also be joined by Professors Bruce Dutu and Eric Osterberg, students Kate Yo and Solange Acosta Rodriguez, who will each share stories about why they're passionate about climate resilience and climate justice here at Dartmouth and beyond. I thought we'd kick it off with our glossy video. I today took the liberty of sending our announcement to many of my colleagues in the Ivy Plus Sustainability Consortium and the NECSC, and one of the things that everyone said is they felt like this video was awesome and very symbolic, because instead of it being a president sitting in their office talking, it was a president talking while we got to see what students and faculty were doing on the ground. So for me, that was like the most awesome feedback. That felt very symbolic of what this collaborative is and what it will become. So without further ado, I turn to the glossy video, which by the way was a production of about 15 members of Dartmouth's media production team who worked on double overtime in very difficult conditions to pull this together. So I appreciate them very much.
Innovation and forward thinking are part of Dartmouth's DNA. We seek solutions to persistent problems, guided by the North Star of our research and teaching mission, informed by the gritty ingenuity of our rural setting. But if we are to live up to being the big green, we must do more to hasten our pace in fighting climate change. And today, we are. Today, we launched the Dartmouth Climate Collaborative. New carbon goals for Dartmouth will reduce operational emissions on campus 60% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. Decarbonization, a cornerstone of the collaborative, will be one of the most significant operational projects Dartmouth has tackled. Complementing this commitment, we will also implement a comprehensive set of initiatives to address climate change, leveraging our profound sense of place and collective spirit to find solutions to the world's most challenging problems. Part of the Dartmouth Climate Collaborative, the Climate Futures Initiative, will help map how our existing academic strengths can be connected in new ways for new knowledge creation and real-world impact. A new Climate Advisory Council will bring together our operations, research, and the potential for Dartmouth to function as a campus laboratory for climate solutions. Solutions we can't achieve without trusted partners like the Town of Hanover's Sustainability Champions and other off-campus innovators. The Dartmouth Climate Collaborative, conceived by climate leaders across Dartmouth's campus, envisions a more sustainable world, created and supported by humanity's collective accountability, cooperation, and innovation. It is imperative that we act. This must start here, with all of us at Dartmouth.
I was really psyched by how many individual people they got into that video. That made me feel really joyful. So I'm going to hand over the mic to Professor Laura Ogden, who one of the great benefits of our work in the last 6 months is I've gotten to know Laura a little bit, and it has been an enormous privilege. She's a fellow resident of the town of Stratford, of which we're both very proud. But she's also just a fantastic person. Laura is the special advisor to the Provost on Climate and Sustainability, and she's going to talk more about the Climate Futures Initiative and how Dartmouth will amplify our teaching and research on climate.
Well, I have to ditto what Rosie just said, that I've learned so much in the last several months around campus, trying to understand what matters to people about climate change. And a lot of what I've learned is from Rosie and her staff in the Sustainability Office. And so there's not enough clapping that we could do for her, but let's just go ahead and try. As President Bylock said in the video, and as Rosie said, I'm really pleased to lead this year something that's called the Climate Futures Initiative for the Provost's Office. And it sounds boring, but I'll try to make it less boring. What it is a one-year planning effort, but a lot of conversations with faculty, with students, and with alumni to try to understand where we should be going as an academic institution to prepare ourselves and the citizens of the future for a different world. And this is why I think, and the trajectory of the possibility of different worlds, for that matter. So for the first few months taking this position, I spent a lot of time talking one-on-one with faculty and students around campus. And I learned 4 things that are guiding the rest of the year. One is that people on campus feel an enormous urgency about climate change. And we feel like we're behind the ball when it comes to responding adequately to climate change as an institution. The second thing I learned is that there's a lot of an enormous amount of work already that's being done on campus around climate change research and teaching, but that we're not telling that story well. The work that we're doing around climate change already some of it is about climate solutions, but a lot of it is also about understanding the ways in which climate and climate change and climate anxiety is transforming communities in very unequal ways, and also transforming the places people call home. It's this way by which climate change touches us and touches those that are going to come after us that I think I'm hearing matters a lot to us here at Dartmouth. And we need to be able to tell that story as well, teach about it, and understand it better. And what I heard there was that it's very important for us to understand climate change and sustainability through the breadth of what we do as a liberal arts institution. So that's the second thing. The third thing I learned was that at Dartmouth, many of us, most of us, have a profound sense of place here, and would like to ground what we do and what we understand about climate change in place. Many people come to Dartmouth, right? It's sort of a self-selector a little bit for coming to a rural New Hampshire school. The fourth thing I want to say that I heard and that matters to me a lot is one of the things these three things make Dartmouth special, but the fourth thing is that we've had a historic and ongoing commitment to Native American Indigenous studies and to students. And we need to make sure that this element also is tightly bound to our commitments to understand climate change and climate futures. These are these four things that I have learned, and that is shaping the rest of this year for me. So the Climate Futures Initiative has three parts to it, and you're not going to be surprised about the first two. One is to kind of ask, how can we best sort of understand the research and scholarship and creative work that's happening at Dartmouth, what we're doing best around climate change already, and where we need to put extra funding, resources, et cetera, to amplify that. So one thing that we're thinking about this year is about research. The second thing you're not going to be surprised about is about curriculum. For example, should we have a major in climate change? We don't. Should we have a master's program that helps train climate leaders? These are big questions, and so we're going to spend the year asking faculty and students, what kind of curriculum do we need to have in place to make sure that we are all climate citizens in the future? The third thing that I'm really excited about, and where Rosie and my work touches the most, is there's a lot of enthusiasm around campus for the campus as lab model. And that is, I think, quite unique, which is to say, we've got this infrastructure, including this amazing and spectacular commitment to decarbonization that President Beilock just made yesterday. Thank you. She just walked in. But how do we take our operations and use these as laboratories to understand more about climate change and more about sustainability? And so this year we're going to kind of experiment with thinking about 3 sites on campus to do that. And one is our organic farm, which is already an amazing place. I'm sure many of you have been out there. It's a great place for all kinds of experiences that people have in terms of food and food production. But can we also utilize it as a place for studying and learning about climate change? Could it be a place that we grow heirloom seeds, for example, that may be at risk in a changing climate? Who knows? This is one question that we have. How can we use the organic farm in ways that activate our knowledge and teaching around climate change? The second site are our forests. You know, Dartmouth has 30,000 acres of forest, including the Second College Grant, which are amazing resources, and many of us don't get to spend enough time there. How can we think about these forests, such as the Second College Grant, as places that can be experimental forests for learning and teaching about climate change? Could we have an artist in residency program around climate change at the Second College Grant? Could we do an increasing kind of research on silviculture out there and the relationship of forestry to climate change? These are all really important questions. Could we have students out there doing more research? And then the third site, which I'm particularly interested in, is our efforts on campus for decarbonization. And so we're going to be asking in the next 2 weeks faculty to come together and say, we're going to be digging these big boreholes around campus, where this is going to be one of the biggest infrastructure projects this campus has seen in 100 years, and we should not let this opportunity go without actually using this also as a place to learn. I mean, these holes really go down into the deep earth, maybe to the Pleistocene, and we should be peering down into those holes and understanding something more about time and our place, etc., through these projects. So these are these three elements: research, teaching, and campus's lab that the Climate Futures Initiative has. And I just want to welcome any of you all to get in touch with me and talk to me. I'd love to hear what you have to say and also get you involved. Thank you.
So I said when I started that our accomplishment this week was the work of countless people in this room and many people beyond. It also was a bold and visionary move and a strong leadership move for Dartmouth. So I want to acknowledge President Beilock and thank her for joining us tonight. She's a little bit of a surprise guest who snuck in the back, but I think we should give her a huge round of applause for having the vision and leadership to pull together these elements for the Dartmouth Climate Collaborative. So what is the Dartmouth Climate Collaborative? We've already heard about the Climate Futures Initiative, which is an important and compelling part of the collaborative. We think of the collaborative as having 4 legs. I keep saying 4 legs of a stool, but I think if something has 4 legs, it's a chair. So 4 legs to the chair: research, teaching, operational transformation, and what am I missing? Experiential learning, campus as lab. Thank you, Rachel. And these are the 4 legs of our Dartmouth Climate Collaborative chair. So I want to talk a little bit about operations, which is something that I think a lot about, Dartmouth's actual carbon footprint. And a lot of the $500 million that President Beilock committed to spending over the next 5 years to decarbonize our campus is going to go towards this problem. We have aging infrastructure at Dartmouth. This is a photo that anyone who's ever seen me talk has seen me use. I took this with my cell phone on a cold February day. And this is an aging steam tunnel that was built with a horse and buggy and a guy with a shovel. I have pictures of it, it's true. And Dartmouth steam plant in the background. Replacing this aging infrastructure is critical, whether we want to decarbonize or not, but it also provides an incredible opportunity for Dartmouth to decarbonize, to make our campus more resilient, and, as Laura said, to use our campus as a living laboratory. So, again, this is a really big deal. I got a lot of emails asking, how did you do this? Again, the answer was, it wasn't me, it was a collaborative. But to get this kind of commitment is a really big deal, our biggest infrastructural project. And one important component of that is more ambitious goals for Dartmouth's carbon reduction. So those who have been following the IPCC over the last however many years, 30 years, know that every IPCC report calls more urgently for more action sooner. The most recent IPCC report called for a 50% carbon reduction by 2030. The goals that President Beilock enumerated last night exceed that ambition, which we feel like is in line with Dartmouth's imperative to act and to leverage our relative privilege to reduce our carbon emissions more drastically. So to me, this is a really big deal to have an ambitious goal like that. How are we going to do that? What are we going to spend that money on? This is one of the questions that Professor Osterberg asked me when I walked in the room. It's expensive to decarbonize. It takes physical stuff, and it's going to take a combination of things. When I first arrived at Dartmouth and I looked at the energy plant, I thought, what could we replace number 6 fuel oil, which is pretty gross stuff? What could we replace that with? The answer, I think, I was asking the wrong question. I was asking, what can we replace that with that will solve the whole problem? The answer we finally arrived at is that we will replace number 6 fuel oil with many things. We will replace it with geo-exchange bore fields. We will also make our buildings more efficient. We will use thermal storage. We will improve our electrical resiliency. We'll use heat pump plants, and we'll use solar thermal with seasonal storage. and probably things that aren't on here yet, right? Because we're not going to be able to do this overnight. It's going to take us a minute. And one can imagine that in 7 years, there might be a technology that's not on here that will be less expensive and better. Another important part of this is how we're approaching it. So one can think about our campus as a series of districts. I think this way of thinking was a big breakthrough in our decarbonization strategy because it's enabled us to think about each zone as a freestanding zone and a unit where we can solve decarbonization in that unit, but we can also leave it freestanding for as long as we need to. So by moving district by district, we are going to be able to disturb a limited area at one time before we move on to a different area. We're not playing here, right? And it's going to be pretty disturbing to drill geo-exchange bore fields or to lay down pipes. So we want to make sure we're containing that disturbance into specific areas and also that we're leaving ourselves the possibility of future technology. So as we go district by district, we can adapt as more tools become available. And I feel like this was a big breakthrough as well to think about it in this way. I also want to highlight, we're talking a lot about energy and decarbonization, but energy and decarbonization are connected to all the other operational areas on Dartmouth's campus. So producing food consumes energy. Driving from Maple Street over to here with tonight's dinner consumes fossil fuel. So we are not just thinking about energy, we're also thinking about the other operational areas and how they connect with energy. And I think it's worth saying that Dartmouth has many wonderful traditions. One of those traditions, and I think a really important academic ancestry of our current sustainability initiatives is systems thinking. And that's what I see emergent in our energy plan, our decarbonization plan, and also in the collaborative, which connects faculty and operations, academics, and our campus in a new and profound way. Laura mentioned our sense of place, and I think one of the things that I was really excited by, people ask when you're the director of sustainability all the time, what's the right thing to do? Should I use paper or plastic, right? Should I get an electric car or decarbonize my house? And the answer is it depends. One of the things it depends on is where you are. Another reason I feel like the Climate Collaborative is an incredible step for Dartmouth is it's an acknowledgement of who and where we are, and the solutions we're developing are place-based and based on the expertise and the strengths of the people here. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite President Beilock, should she be willing, to come up and share a few words.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to stop by and really say thank you to everyone in this room who helped and supported and pushed Dartmouth to make the commitments that we made yesterday. And the best part of being a leader of this institution is when faculty, students, staff, alums, community members come together and the product of their ideas is more than the sum of their parts. So I talk a lot about 1 + 1 = 3 and what we can do here at Dartmouth, and I'm so excited for this work. I'm excited to be along for the journey, and I'm excited for us to be a leader and really live up to our moniker of the Big Green. So thank you for being here and for all the work you're doing and will do.
So now I'm going to turn the mic over to some really important members of the Dartmouth community, starting with Professor Eric Osterberg. Professor Osterberg, through his glacier ice core research, studies how climate change impacts communities. And among many other things, he chairs the Upper Valley Climate Adaptation Working Group, for which I'm eternally grateful. I won't bore you with a long bio in deference to turning the mic over to Professor Osterberg sooner. So thanks so much, Eric.
Thank you, Rosie. I didn't know I was going first. All right, so my name's Eric. I'm in the Earth Science Department. I'm a climate scientist. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of friends in the room. I was asked to talk about this from the heart. You know, what did yesterday's announcement mean to me personally? So what I'm going to do is share with you, I got a lot of emotions, mostly really, really positive emotions about what happened yesterday. The first, of course, being the word we already heard, which is gratitude. You know, Rosie and Laura mentioned gratitude for all the people who have been working for this for years and years, decades, to get to that point where we had that announcement yesterday. But I think it's equally, perhaps more important, that those sort of grizzled voices, those well-seasoned voices, have been like so passionately and importantly supported, amplified by our students. So students in the past, but you all right now. Like, we would not be here if you all weren't as passionate and strongly supportive of this initiative as you are. So thank you for everything you're doing. I'm also really excited because I do feel like this could be an inflection point for this institution. It's been an inflection point for me personally with my family and the things that we're doing about climate change in our household. And I think it's an inflection point, or possible inflection point, for the rest of society as well. For a long time, it's kind of felt like we've been, you know, lonely voices, right, shouting from the wilderness about climate change. And now I feel, anyway, that we're more like a crowd, that we're all marching together in the same direction with some common purpose and with some common goals. And we know that this is how progress actually gets made. You can go years and years beating your head against the wall, working tirelessly, seemingly not making much progress, and then all of a sudden you make a step function leap forward. We saw this happen with the Inflation Reduction Act on the national level, right? Seemingly came out of nowhere. But it wasn't. It was after years and years and decades of hard work. You even see this in your own personal life, right? You say every day, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then one day you actually start doing it and you never go back. So this has the opportunity, this has the potential for this institution to be one of those moments. I'm also excited because this issue of climate change and sustainability absolutely requires us to work together across the liberal arts. This cannot be solved by any one discipline, by any one department, by any one institution. This requires us to work together across disciplines with as many different people with diverse views as possible. And I absolutely love that collaborative is the core part of this name, right? Because that is what we have to do. We have to collaborate together. And that's why a place like Dartmouth, in my mind, is so well poised to actually take a leadership position on this. We have the scale, we have the kind of people who are interested in working together, who have been working together for years, to actually take this to the next level, to sort of live that collaboration the way that we might make the most success moving forward. What I'm most excited about is that this potential inflection point corresponds in time with what I see as a sea change in my own field, my own research discipline of climate change. For a really long time, we had a certain way of interacting with, say, with communities, with sharing our results with communities, and it was unidirectional. We would show up and we would spread our knowledge and try and make things better. And these were well-intentioned actions, but what we've now come to understand is that they were very often very harmful actions, and certainly not productive actions. So this is a moment when my field has suddenly realized that if we're actually going to have true partnerships, true collaborations with people from all over the world, different communities coming from different backgrounds, the first thing you got to do is listen. Just shut up and listen. And that's a huge change. If we had just talked about that even 5 or 6 years ago, at least in my field, this was not something we were thinking about. And I can say we got a long way to go. At least now we acknowledge that we're really bad at this and that there's a lot of improvement. And most importantly, my community now is like working really hard to learn how to do this better. And we understand that's going to be a long process. I'm also excited to really do this together with our students to establish much stronger connections. Okay, so these are connections and meaningful connections with communities, but also stronger connections with the natural world. It seems like in this modern society, so often we're focused on me, our own individual problems, and so often we're engrossed in an artificial digital world. What I love about this opportunity of dealing with climate change is that this is an opportunity for us to get out, to actually listen to, really truly work collaboratively with people who have totally different backgrounds from us, who have very different perspectives, different concerns than we do, different ways of approaching the problem, where we can really learn from each other and at the same time interact directly with the natural world, reconnect to the natural world. I think that's so vitally important. I don't think I'm saying anything new to this crowd, but we know that when you stop worrying so much about yourself and start focusing on helping other people and connecting with the natural world, you know, President Beilock's all about the data. The data shows you become happier, you feel like you're living a more fulfilled and purposeful life. What a win-win, right? What a wonderful lesson for us to really start engendering more here at Dartmouth in collaboration with our students. So I'm really excited to get students, get you all, get me out of this Dartmouth bubble. Get out in the community, working with people, connecting back with the natural world. Finally, I feel a sense of hope. You knew I was going to talk about hope. I'm a big believer in the power of hope. I think it's really important in moments like this to stop, to pause, and acknowledge the progress that's been made. I think too often, it's really easy to get engrossed in the bad news, right? Particularly in our media consumed culture. Bad news sells, and you can just go down these really mentally unhealthy bad news rabbit holes. But we need to stop and acknowledge when really good stuff happens, and this is one of those moments where something really special has happened, and we need to acknowledge that and notice this as a moment of joy. But as a scientist, I told you that this is an opportunity to be an inflection point. But I know, as a statistician and scientist, you can only recognize an inflection point later on down the pike, when you've actually changed your direction. So this is the potential for us to have an inflection point here as an institution. But there is so much to do. We actually have to do it now. So what I would say is tonight, let's celebrate, and tomorrow, let's get back to work. Thank you all.
So now I'm going to invite Kate Yeo to join us. Kate is a 25 who was a member of the Singapore Youth for Climate Action and participated in UN climate negotiations, including COP27 and 28. On campus, Kate has been active in Fossil-Free Dartmouth and implementing reusable tumbler programs and campus cafes. So if you get to reuse your mug at a campus cafe, you can thank Jacob and Kate.
Hello, test. Yeah? Can you guys hear? Okay, awesome. Hi everyone, my name is Kate. I'm a 25 here and I'm an international student from Singapore. So on campus, I'm an organizer with Fossil-Free Dartmouth, and we are a student group calling on the college to move away from the fossil fuel industry. By that, we don't just mean in our energy mix, but also in terms of our policies. So for example, thinking about where our research funding comes from for energy and climate research, or thinking about who we platform in a lot of our events and career fairs. The bulk of my climate work, though, happens outside of school. I co-lead an advocacy group called Singapore Youth for Climate Action. And we are getting to those slides. There we go. And Singapore Youth for Climate Action, one of the main things we do is run workshops for young Singaporeans to introduce them to the framework of climate justice. So let me just share some context about Singapore. It's very much this technocratic, pragmatic, and top-down kind of state. The government does care about climate change, but I would say in a very specific way. So for example, we talk about sea level rise and how it might affect property value, or we talk about heat and how it might affect work productivity. In fact, and I'm gonna go on a tangent here, but our founding father, the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, he once said that the air conditioning is the most important invention because it allowed for economic development in the hot and humid tropics. And so that was the first thing he did. When he became prime minister in 1959, he installed air conditioning in the civil service buildings. What I'm trying to get at here is that the state speaks this language of productivity and efficiency and cost benefit. And as a ground-up group, Singapore Youth for Climate Action tries to bring a different lens to this issue. Something that we call attention to in our workshops is how it's Singapore's migrant workers who are in the sun, in the construction or landscaping industry, who are really bearing the brunt of climate impacts. And for me, as someone who didn't grow up really caring about nature, I didn't know what the outdoors looked like. I grew up surrounded by high-rise buildings and concrete and metal. It was really caring about people that brought me into the climate movement. And so in high school, I began to get more involved in advocacy and activism, posting on social media, writing petitions, starting some campaigns. Here's the problem though. Holding up a sign in Singapore, any kind of sign in public, will get you arrested. I can see my Singaporean friend there laughing, and I really do mean any sign, even if it's just a smiley face. The things you post on social media could be closely tracked, and we have what we call fake news laws. So if I post something on social media, it could be branded as false information, and I would get into trouble for that. Except that what is true or false is entirely decided by the state. So that kind of poses a problem because as a climate activist, I critique government policy. That's part of my role. And I am constantly anxious and worried about that. I fear about being blacklisted, about my future employment prospects, about my scholarship, about crossing this kind of invisible line that you don't really know where it lies until you've crossed it. And that's scary. I've carried a lot of that fear even here to Dartmouth. Part of it is ingrained in me, and so even getting into the slightest bit of trouble will send me into panic because there are repercussions when I go back home, even if I'm taking part in protests outside of my country. But the other part of that fear is just the fact that going against the status quo is always scary. Taking a stand, voicing your opinion is scary. It's scary to say that I don't think a Sustainable Energy Institute should be celebrating an oil company. It's also scary to say that I don't think we should be awarding an honorary degree to someone who has spent 20 years in one of the most powerful oil lobbying groups. That's scary. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that fear because a lot of youth activists, we're just like anyone else. We have the same risk, we have the same fears, but we choose to act on our convictions over our fears anyway because this is an issue that matters so much to us. It's not just fear, unfortunately, there's also a lot of despair, as I'm sure you know. And about a year and a half ago, I decided to skip the last 2 weeks of school. This was during my sophomore fall, and hop on a plane to Egypt instead. This was the COP27 conference, my first COP. And COP is basically this annual UN climate summit where heads of states, civil society, researchers come together and try and shift climate policy forward. And I remember just being incredibly excited as a sophomore, so optimistic, so energized going in. Rookie mistake. On the last night, I remember just sitting on the floor of my hostel room and feeling completely numb. It was like the life had just been sucked out of me after 2 weeks. And that's because two worlds exist at COP. So on one hand, you have policymakers sitting in air-conditioned halls negotiating policy. You step outside and you see people holding banners, chanting, shouting. And for 2 whole weeks in Egypt, I watched as policymakers would just walk past the protests without even so much as a brief pause in their footsteps. It was like they didn't even exist. And that was just a moment for me of, what are we fighting for? And who are we fighting for? And so, in moments like that, there are 2 things that really stand out for me. Professor Osterberg talked about one of them, which is recognizing what has already shifted. I think we really do sell ourselves short when we act as if nothing can change, when things already have. And just a quick example of that, I'm sure some of you may know, in the 2015 Paris Agreement, 0 mentions of fossil fuels. That phrase just wasn't in the agreement because of lobbying efforts. When I went to COP, this time 80 countries supported a phase down or a phase out of fossil fuels. Last year, when I went back to Dubai for COP28, 127 countries supported a phase out of fossil fuels. So things are shifting. And the thing is, when you speak up, I feel like you give permission for other people in the room to do the same. And there is so much strength and safety in those numbers. The second thing for me that really helps is community. Some of my favorite moments in COP are meeting a friend in person for the first time after we've met on social media and talked for years, or sitting on the floor of the hallways eating biscuits because we can't afford any of the sandwiches being sold inside, painting banners, sitting, laughing, crying, lots of crying. But it's always people. COPs are simultaneously some of the most hopeless and hope-filled spaces for me. I think they really taught me that I can hold despair and hope at the same time. I just want to end off today by talking about this phrase climate emergency, because we've used it a lot, emergency, to signal fear and panic. And I'm at the point of my climate journey where I realize that just doesn't work. For me, I try and look at climate change as not something to solve, but to imagine what kind of lives do we want to lead? What kind of new ways of creation can we create? Because the word emergency is actually rooted in the word emergence, which means rising out and rising up. And so for me, I'm really trying to redefine wealth for myself, not in terms of how much time I'm pouring into my work or how much money I'm gonna earn after I graduate, but really the time I invest in my friends, in nature, in community. I have one more slide here, and this one is for my friends who are here just for the free food, or for any decision makers in the room. I just wanna say, don't be this person. You can applaud, but we're not here to be applauded. We're here to invite you in to please join us in this fight. So I just want to thank you guys all for the work and for the progress we've made. It really just makes me so happy. Thank you.
I have a lot of confidence after hearing Kate talk. Next, I'd like to invite Solange Acosta-Rodriguez, 24, to join us on stage. Solange is a researcher with the Energy Justice Clinic, an outdoor educator, and a student worker at Novak, among many other things. Come on up.
Sweet. Okay, awesome. Cool. All right, hi everyone. First off, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. Week 5 is madness. I know several people probably in this room have pulled all-nighters in the past 3 days, finishing midterms and everything. And so just thank you for taking the time to be here. And thank you to the SUSD office for putting this together. I also just want to shout out Kate and everyone at Fossil Free Dartmouth, the Sunrise Movement, and all the other student organizations who put together such a wonderful festival yesterday out on the green. So a round of applause for them. Because y'all brought together people from all corners of campus to celebrate the Earth and to continue pushing Dartmouth to create a better future. And I think that's one of the things that Kate touched upon, and I think is one of the most important things being a part of the climate activist movement, is that you have to make room for all the emotions. And so a lot of the time there's struggle and there's grief and you cry a lot, but also make space for joy and to celebrate the Earth and what we're doing and what we will continue to do. So as was mentioned in my introduction, I think I was privileged enough to be born and raised in Miami, Florida, in the midst of a vibrant Latina community and a beautiful natural environment. And so I grew up biking to the beach all the time with my little Cuban and Argentine pastries in my backpack. I'd picnic in the sand with family and friends. My favorite park in the whole world is this place called Matheson Hammock, and you just go down this beautiful little path through the mangroves. You see all the fish, the birds, and everything that thrived in this aquatic forest. And over the course of my lifetime, the path became unusable because the level of the ocean has risen too much and it is underwater. And it's not just Matheson Hammock. The seemingly daily record rainfalls inundate Miami every day. If you look up hashtag Miami on Instagram, you'll see downtown literally flooded every other week. The drainage canal in my backyard that was once it's ducks and floating coconuts and if you were really lucky, a manatee. Now when I see it, I see stress and I see the potential of my house being 8 feet above water. And so seeing Miami start to go under is what brought me to climate activism in the first place. That picture there on the left, unearthed from the archives, is me on Earth Day in 2017, going to my first ever rally for the March for Science, and we were basically begging Rick Scott, then governor, now senator, to formally recognize climate change as a threat to the state. I could see that climate change posed this existential threat to my city and that we needed to take real climate action and take it now. That thought, that ultimatum, it's terrifying. Like, oh my God, if we don't do anything right now, the world's gonna end. And that sense of like fear and anxiety really weighed on me. And so I came to college and I thought like, okay, maybe I'll assuage my anxieties and I'm just gonna learn. I tried to like DIY an environmental justice major, that didn't work. And I tried to like learn and learn and learn and read and read and read and think that if I knew about every problem that existed in the whole world, that would help. Turns out it didn't. It actually doesn't help to know all the problems that are going on in the entire world all the time. And I ended up even more afraid than before, because how the hell do you deal with a problem that is so large and so all-encompassing and so massively overwhelming that it's true, it's literally happening everywhere all at once, all at the same time. And I just felt really alone. And then I came to Dartmouth, and so I kept on struggling even in my rut, and I started organizing with Sunrise, and in this very room 3 years ago, we held a vigil for the planet. You can see here with Rachel, and it feels very full circle and really special to be here in this moment, because we were talking about inflection points earlier. That vigil was an inflection point for me as a way to get out of this like climate doomerism that it's all too easy to succumb to. It's that you show up and you show up together. This was COVID, everyone had masks on, we were all sitting 6 feet apart. It was supposed to be out on the green and then it snowed because it's New Hampshire. And so in here, when I was giving the closing remarks back then, I was quoting Carl Sagan and the Pale Blue Dot speech. And so I want to share a few more words from that with you today. And how everyone you love and everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was, has lived out their lives here on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. And it brings me tremendous comfort still to be reminded of how our planet that is so enormously massive and interconnected and complex, and that we face equally massive and interconnected and complex problems, is so beautifully small and fragile, and that we get to exist here upon it. And if we go to Mink Brook and we hold a stone, as we did back then, that's a piece of the world in our hands. And so therefore, the world is in our hands, and we can do something about it. At the end of that vigil, I was no longer afraid because I no longer felt alone. Even in the room of masks and people sitting 6 feet apart, I found that the answer to that question of how we tackle climate change is so deceptively simple that it seems impossible. We do it together. And everyone has talked about community because it's true. When we face problems that are so seemingly insurmountable and massive and overwhelming, we try. And we try, and we try again, and we try again, and we try again, and when we fail, we rely on our community to build ourselves back up. Like Rachel worked with Divest Dartmouth for years, and then it was finally like 3 years later that Divest Dartmouth succeeded. And now 3 years later, we're getting another mission. Like the Dartmouth Climate Collaborative is beginning. There is no point in learning about the problems of the world if you don't have a community to talk about it with, and a community to celebrate when things go well. Each of us individually is never gonna fix climate change alone. I'm a big political ecology person, and one of the things that we talk about a lot is like the hatchet and the seed. And so we name the systems of oppression, and we also need to plant the seeds too, and work with others to take action on behalf of the people and the places that you love. The forces of racism, sexism, homophobia, and capitalism seek to tear us apart, to fragment our communities, and to pit us against each other. And so we must stand fast and truly focus on building connection across time and place, across all struggles to make the world a better place. We don't get to just pick which struggle is the most convenient to us to solve, because all problems are related. And so we struggle for one to struggle for all. And so, where did this go? I want to talk next about something that gives me hope, and to share the story of the Pilmaiquen case, as I call it. And so to share it with all of you to maybe see if it'll inspire you too. I began researching with the Energy Justice Clinic about 2 years ago, working with a transnational team of activists and lawyers and researchers to support the Mapuche Huiliche communities in southern Chile. This here is Lago Ranco, situated within the area that I've been studying in. If you want to hear all the specifics about it, my thesis presentation is May 22nd, 5:45 p.m. But I want to talk specifically right now about one moment from the past year, where alongside Dr. Sarah Kelly and so many wonderful student scholar activists from Dartmouth, from Chile, and from Norway, we worked together to bring the Machi Miarai, the spiritual leader of this community in Chile, directly to Norway to meet with the corporation that is illegally building dams on the sacred river, the Pilmaiquen, without community consent. And so when I was in Chile, we worked with the Machi, generating a report, doing that community feedback where the scholars write the report, but it isn't useful if it isn't coming from the community too. And so working together to create a report that went to Norwegian legislators and that was used by Norwegian legislators to raise awareness about the problem. And then we went to Norway and went and protested directly outside the offices, and the Machi spoke directly to Statkraft officials, and though Statkraft was dismissive and is yet to desist the building of the projects, the trip was a mission of hope. Because through this trip, Machi Miarai was able to meet, and the Mapuche delegation was able to meet with the Southern Sami indigenous group, who are also struggling against the same corporation within Norway. They talked about the parallels of their struggles, the strategies of success and strategies that need improvement in the fight against green colonialism. We came together in community spaces, meeting with other expat activists who had been kicked out of Latin America during the ages of dictatorship, who came together to still support this new cause. We came together, we made art, we sang, and it was just this incredible moment of joy, because we all realized that we aren't alone, and that we're never alone. And so we continue to gather in spaces like this, all of you here, to share this meal in communion and cultivate the fact that we're here together. Creating transformative climate justice can seem impossible. But as activist Lisa Marie Cacho writes, empowerment comes from deciding that the outcome of the struggle doesn't matter as much as the decision to struggle. The violence of climate change occurs because we believe ourselves separate from one another, as separate from our environment, as distinct from our non-human kin. Let's dare to hope together then. Let's expand the boundaries of community and to tear down the artificial dichotomy that exists between us and nature. Let's dare to imagine a future where human and other than human entities are no longer abstracted from one another, and where we have radical empathy for all. And so now I call on all of you. Let's dare to put theory into action. Let's get out of the classrooms and actually do what we talk about, and actually use the incredible education that we're afforded to here to advance good in the world, rather than, admittedly, it's very easy and it's very hard. It's very hard to break out of the norm that we're kind of taught. I feel, I'm talking now to the students in the crowd, it's kind of you get to Dartmouth maybe with a lot of action and inspiration, and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna go change the world. And then by the time you're a jaded senior, you're like, oh my God, all I wanna do is graduate and just get out and maybe try to find a job and a stability and a career, And so then I think the way to break out of that and to avoid falling into that system is to rely on your community, because together we all still have that same energy that will get us forward and that will get us, not working for McKinsey or Bain, but actually going out and making change, because we all have the energy and we all have the capacity to do good work in this world. And so I beg of you, I'm asking you, that let's keep fighting, and let's not get complacent, because we see the good that has already been done with Divest Dartmouth and now with the Dartmouth Collaborative. And let's create, let's imagine, let's dream of a world that is better. We can do better. We're already doing better. And so let's continue to do better. Climate change threatens to tear us apart. And I know that we have the intention and the capacity to all come back together. Build community, get out there, and transformative climate justice is now, and it's us. Thank you.
Our last speaker is Professor Bruce Dutu. Professor Dutu does research about federal law and policy relating to tribal nations and indigenous peoples, and he served, among many other things, as a trustee for Earth Justice for nearly 18 years. Please join us, Professor Dutu.
Can we get that slide of the... Good evening. So this is where I grew up, southern Louisiana. Is there a little pointy thing?
Yeah, I think there's a laser on there. It looks like a little red.
You can hardly see. Can you guys see right here? Well, I'll point it. Right there is a little village called Dulac. That's where I grew up. When I came to Dartmouth, the local paper in Houma, that's the name of my people. So I'm from the United Houma Nation tribe in southeastern Louisiana. And you can see Houma up here. So this was ancestral homeland, or at least after the last 200 years. Dulac, this red, all that you see in red are estimates from various sources, including U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, about what's likely to be underwater in about 4 decades, no matter what we do. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening down there. There's all kinds of infrastructure development that's going on for remediation, et cetera. Some of it is planned in terms of assuming nature comes through the front door. It's not going to work if nature comes from the window or from the back door, as she often does. And so this is what inspires me to take seriously all the calls that you've heard for urgent action. This began happening for a long time, and so this is not news, because growing up in a very vulnerable coastal community, this is stuff we could observe. Some of my elders would even talk about shifts in the wind, the water, what seasons. They're shrimpers, they live on the land. And so as a kid growing up in the bayous, I would hear a bit of concern, not a bit, a lot of concern in my relatives who were hunters and fishermen and oystermen and so forth. So it's the rest of the world that was just not paying attention to all the bells that were being sounded by communities around the world in terms of things are changing and it's not for the good, and what are we going to do about it? When I came to Dartmouth in 1976 for my freshman year, the local paper, the Houma Daily Courier, ran a front page story, and the headline was, Dutu's Journey from Dulac to Dartmouth. You know, they love the alliteration there. And I have to say, I was pretty full of myself because no one in my tribe had ever, there was a lot of firsts there. No one had gone to college, no one had gone to an Ivy League school in my high school's history. There's a lot of those kinds of things. And for a while you start, they warn against believing your own press, and you start to get self-absorbed. It happens to many of us. And for me, coming here was very transformative in many, many ways. One of the ways it was transformative is like, I don't know everything. Everyone around me seems much smarter than I am. Does that sound familiar to some of you? How did I get in? I want to go back and read my admissions files and see what did they really write on my thing to say, let's give it a shot. He's kind of entertaining because he's from a place none of us have ever heard of. There's got to be some value in that. But another way that Dartmouth was transformative was putting me in conversation with folks who really did share the kind of background that I came from. You kind of find your people, right? This place is both big enough and small enough. It has what former President Jim Wright called a community of scale, where you can actually, when you spend time here, you find folks not only who affirm what you already believe, that's one form of community, and I challenge you to say whether or not that's the best kind of community. Because if you just sit around like minds, you hear about echo chambers and things like that. So what that did for me was to be cognizant of the kinds of changes that were happening in my own mind and heart when I would go back home. Because in my lifetime, there was a profound transition in terms of the way that our families supported their families. We went from a fishing community, primarily a fishing community, to dependence on oil and gas. So all of my uncles, my cousins, and so forth, who knew these lakes and streams and rivers and bayous better than anybody, hired themselves out to be deckhands and captains on crew boats and tugboats and offshore rig workers and roustabouts. And soon the vernacular in the community was no longer about when's the duck season, when is the fishing and the May season, the August season for shrimping. It was about 20 and 20 shifts, 20 on, 20 off. It was about foremen and building a platform, fixed rigs, offshore, movable rigs. All of that, the terminology around our tables changed in my lifetime because there was this transition. And so going back home, fast forward, has increasingly been more and more complex because I am talking to family members who, because of my work and my association with groups like Earth Justice, they lovingly, but kind of with a little tinge of they call me, "Oh, Bruce, the job killer." And there's a little bit of a smile, but it's not a real smile because they know that what we do at Earth Justice is to put them out of work, is to push the community, the world, this is what it looks like to move from fossil fuels, is to say, these folks are not going to have jobs. Now, I'll give you one example of how I have that conversation because I don't go down and use settler colonial and all that. You have to find another vocabulary. And it's not because my family is not smart. Is because we have to learn all of this fancy rhetoric and theory and all this stuff. It's very helpful for a certain audience. It doesn't work for every audience. You have to know who you're speaking to. When I go down and I'm speaking to a group of very hardworking, putting check to check, paycheck to paycheck, family members who know what I do for a living and say, well, he never gets his hands dirty. And that's a polite way of saying he doesn't really work. We don't really know what he does, but he doesn't really work. So even the definition of what is work is a big conversation. There's a thesis there in terms of what counts as work. And then when they know that in addition to being this la-di-da professor at some school that they still pronounce Dartmouth, all the years that I've been here, I could never get my family to say, you got the accent on the wrong, forget it. Dartmouth. So for almost 20 years, I've been associated with Earth Justice. And now I won't explain the whole story about how that happened. It was just a miracle. And I've been very privileged to be a trustee of this organization for almost 18 years. So my term expires in June, so that's my last meeting will be my swan song. But I'll still stay associated. Here's why I love this organization. A lot of the speakers who were here tonight spoke about activism, and that can take many, many forms. You take to the streets, you go to international meetings, you write letters, you stand in front and stare down the voices and the faces of authority. That is one form of activism. It is not the only form of activism. And I discovered that Earth Justice engages in a kind of activism that is largely off the radar. It's very unsexy work. And I'm going to give you just one example of very unsexy work that has profound changes for everything that we're talking about here. I was on the board when one of our staff attorneys, who is now the president of Earth Justice, a brilliant, brilliant lawyer named Abby Dillon, she and a small team of lawyers came to the board and said, we think we need to be involved in a different sector of advocacy. We know we're top of class when we go to federal court and things like that. But there's another domain of activism where we need to be present because nobody else is present. And we're like, okay, we're all ears. Where should we be going? Public utilities commissioners all over the U.S. They're all around there. Boredom, kind of like, what is that? So they educated us and they said, that is where we lock in contracts for where we're going to get power for our municipalities, our towns, and states. And we lock in these contracts that could go on for 25 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. And nobody was there to contest the record that industry was there presenting to the commissioners. They would come in with scientific estimates about what they were doing. They were coming in with economic estimates about how this is good for ratepayers. And none of this stuff was really being challenged until some of our lawyers started showing up with our own economists and our own scientists to say to the Public Utilities commissioners, before you obligate the state of fill in the blank to a 40-year contract that's going to lock us in to fossil fuel of some kind, oil, coal, fill in the blank for fossil fuel. Before you do that, you ought to listen to this other data, this other information. And suddenly there was a dialogue. It wasn't just a monologue. It was a true dialogue. That was a form of activism. It's a form of unsettling the norm. Decision-making was influenced in a very dramatic way. And suddenly, folks were now beginning to ask for more data to say, well, we're not so sure we're just going to sign the contract. We need you to come back with more estimates or different kinds of estimates because now we're hearing a counter narrative. And so they suddenly had to justify their work. And time again, we saw that this was an important place for us to be, an important arena, among many. It's not the only one. These are, places, they all exist, and they were off our radar. And we're a pretty sophisticated, big-time law firm. I've had the privilege of watching it grow from, maybe about 50 lawyers to now over 300 lawyers. I've heard from federal judges, for example, and other decision makers when they know that industry has been engaged in litigation, and then suddenly Earth Justice joins, and they're like, oh, crap, Earth Justice. And the reason they say that is because they know we're there for as long as it takes. If it's a 50-year battle or a 20-year battle to protect the Tongass up in Alaska, we've been there almost from the beginning. So the lawyers who are there, the team of lawyers that are there, they know they're well-resourced, they're brilliant, they had all kinds of choices about where to go practice law. They're choosing it to fight for our planet and fighting for our communities and fighting for all the things that you heard about today. They're using the power of the law to do that. And the reason that is so empowering is that you know that at the end of the day, a court decree is going to have some stick because we have strong courts in this country. And that's another thing that many countries in the world do not have, is strong courts that can shut down projects, deny permits, and do the kinds of things to say, yeah, you have all kinds of important plans, but you're just going to have to do it in a different way. You're going to have a negative impact on the environment and take seriously an environmental impact statement or do one. How oftentimes that there's not even one to even have the data to say, what are the negative impacts of such and such a project? So in many ways, I felt that I've had a front row seat with an activist oriented organization supported by donors. We don't charge anything to our clients, and our clients have increasingly changed in amazing ways over the years. We, like many of the big green groups, were very much a predominantly white oriented organization, protecting wild spaces and critters, the people who had the time and money to go on vacations, to go see polar bears, and to go, most of us will never see polar bears, right? So it was very much, and you've read the literature about the green groups being outed for saying, you guys are really speaking to a very narrow slice of the American public, the people who can actually do this kind of stuff. We weren't doing environmental justice. Sierra Club wasn't talking about any of this stuff. And they were all exposed for having a very narrow bandwidth of saying, where is your activism for the environmental justice communities, the black and brown communities that are disparately impacted by industry siting their plants or their mines and so forth in their backyards, not in Beverly Hills, not in Scarsdale. It's going to be in places where people can't fight back. Time and time again, just look at the data. Where are all these places going? So groups like Earth Justice had to own up to that and say, yeah, that's right, we're guilty. Guilty as charged. What are we going to do about it? And that's when the explosion of different programming took place. Now we have a climate action team. We have an energy team. We have a tribal partners program. We have over 65 tribal clients that Earth Justice Act represents. We have a lot of black and brown communities. The whole thing has changed. When I first started going to our meetings, and they're headquartered in San Francisco, I'd walk the halls of our very, very lovely offices, and I'd see photos, big blow-up photos, no people. It was just beautiful critters and beautiful spaces. And it was like you could put the big headline to say, who do we protect? Not people of color, not poor people, and certainly not tribal nations. And now it's a very different kind of ethos. Folks say we have to be engaged with where it matters. People's lives hang in the balance. So I show you this slide not as a doom and gloom type of thing, although it does represent that for me. I see it as the thing that makes me want to stay alert and stay engaged and stay active and support the young voices that are here. Find your activism, find your place to make an impact. It might be law, it might be in politics, it might be as an academic. Who knows? You're at the beginning of this, and trust me, if my life is any example, it's going to be an evolutionary type of thing. I often tell groups like, well, what were you going to be when you came to Dartmouth? Or what did you aspire to be when you came to Dartmouth? Catholic priest. How far I've fallen. At least some of my family would say that. So far from this being a doom and gloom scenario, it is sobering. That's certainly what this slide does for me. It's a very sobering reminder that my grandchildren, my wife and I have 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren. My grandchildren will likely not be able to visit the place where their grandpa grew up. That's just a fact. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, but in their lifetimes. Dulac is going to be underwater, almost assuredly. And what does that do to your soul? What does that do to your heart to know that when you think about, I just got back from a conference on dispossession, forced removal from here's your homeland, now you're living here. There is climate migration that's happening. But to know that one of the consequences of our collective sins against nature is that there are places that we will not see again, or places that are already gone, Pacific Islands, coastal communities like mine. And it brings that point home. Just a few years ago, I came across an article from an Australian philosopher who coined a new term. Some of you probably know it. Many of you have probably never heard it. I'd never heard of it. Solastalgia. Yeah. How many of you have heard of that term? A few. I never heard of it. It's a made-up word, like a lot of our words, Solastalgia. It's kind of a term to reflect the state of melancholy about an awareness that one's homeland essentially is disappearing, and there's nothing you can do about it. And what does that do to your soul? What does that do to your heart in terms of knowing? So for so many of us, the places that we are from so inform who you are as an individual. For indigenous peoples, a lot of times you'll hear our stories are embedded in the landscape. We are storied peoples. Our land is storied. That's because there's so much that is embraced and embedded in that landscape. Well, if that is gone permanently, then what are the prospects for building a sense of identity, a sense of connection to one's ancestors? The place where they created those stories no longer exists. And I don't say that to draw pity as much as to say it's a challenge, because this will keep happening all over the world. It may happen to your community, and maybe someday it'll happen to someone's community who actually has power and finally wakes up and says, hey, we ought to do something about this. It's like, well, thanks for joining the party. It's a little late, but there's room on the train. So thank you very much for your dedication, your focus, your time, and you know where to find me whenever you want a cup of coffee to talk about life. Thank you very much.
A huge thank you to all of our speakers, and again to all of you who've been working on climate with such passion for so many years at Dartmouth and have brought about this week's events. I want to leave you with some questions to ponder as you go home, and I hope you'll share your answers with us as you start to answer them. First of all, what aspects of your identity shape your desire for Dartmouth to act on climate? In other words, if you were to give your own mini TED Talk, as tonight's speakers have done, what would you talk about? What questions do you still have about Dartmouth's climate commitment? And what could Dartmouth's distinctive contributions to climate work be? We know we aren't a special snowflake, but what could we do well to play our part and contribute to climate solutions? What are some of the opportunities, new opportunities for real-world impact that Dartmouth can seize? We hope you will use this little QR code to go to a form that we've set up so that you can give us this feedback following this event. Feel free to talk about it with your friends, your colleagues. We heard some resonant themes tonight. One theme was that community is critically important to our success. So I hope you will turn to your community this Earth Week. Another theme is that hope is incredibly important to our success, and that we can hold both hope and the tragedy of loss at the same time. So I hope you will carry those resonant themes as you move out into your day. I hope you will take the time to give us feedback and to contribute, most importantly, to the work that Eric called us to that begins tomorrow. I think I'll take the morning to not work on it, but maybe by 10. We have a lot of work to do to get this done with new resources, new vision, and in an incredible community of collaborators. If I took nothing else away from tonight, it was how I am inspired by all of you. So thank you so much for being here. It would not be a sustainability event if we did not tell you how to sort your waste. So I want to let you know that everything that you ate and all of the utensils are compostable. They can all go in the brown compost bin at the back. Your aluminum cans go in recycling, which is in the middle. And the only thing that should go in the trash really is your name tag. So please do that before you leave. And again, please feel free to join us in events for the rest of the week. We're joined this week by monastics from the Plum Village tradition, the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. I found incredible solace in going to their morning meditation sit. Invite everyone to do that. But they are also joining us for a conversation on climate on Thursday. So I would urge you to check the schedule and find that event. Last year's climate event was, for me, an incredible experience with the monastics, so I hope you'll join us for that. And if you are a student and you're wondering how you're going to find out more about this, there's an open forum coming up with student government, so keep an eye out for that. And you can join me tomorrow in the sustainability office for office hours with, as always, delicious snacks. To talk about what this will actually mean for you and what kind of opportunities it presents. So please take the time to do this, but also take the time tonight to enjoy the gorgeous evening, to celebrate your own achievements and the achievements of others in the Dartmouth community, and to be together. Have a great night. Oh, wait, I need to just give one shout out to the Sustainability Office team, particularly Rachel, who holds us all together, even when I go off script, but also to Marcus and Jack and Laura, who were hauling coolers, picking daffodils, making name tags, assigning people to tables all day long. I don't know what we would do if we weren't working in a team, and I have the best team in the world. So thanks to all of them.